work on the internet governance, we need your participation. It's an old picture, but what I was trying to do here with the next slide is to show you that a lot of different organizations have already set up their view about internet governance. Here it was a few years ago, but what I've done, I can, and I will say a longer time, or much more time before, because it was more than 10 years ago. I didn't change it, sorry. I have done this for my understanding of what was happening at that time in France, in Europe, the second cycle, and in the world for the third cycle. And my idea was to change the country and to be able to change the continent, but I just stick with France, and I may have done one for Italy too. But it's stay as a project, nothing else.
Can you take us through maybe some of the sectors of what you touched on?
Yeah, I was trying here to organize a vision of the landscape where you have at the center a country, then a continent or region, and then the world. And I have split it into organization link with definition of standards, with regulators, with international organization, think tanks, and users, the organization who gather users. And you see there are not just one or two, there are a lot, but both business users and individual end users, and the internet providers or...
the laser?
Yeah. And I really try to put all those, and for example, here in the user side, you can see at the hardware level, I have had one link with some industry, like IATA for airline industry, because at that time, CETA, who was linked with IATA, was going for a new GTL link. But now they are not just a user, but also a provider of internet technology. You already saw this one this morning, then I will not go through too much, but it's a view of the same thing by Internet Society. And if you go into detail of each of the cycle, maybe you want to say something, Olivier, about this one? Or?
Well, one of the interesting things is that most of these bodies are multi-stakeholder. Some of them are not. Some of them are multilateral in scope. And it's interesting because they all have to work together to make the internet work. So if you look at, for example, open standards development, then you'll have standard bodies like the World Wide Web Consortium, like the ITU telecom sector, like some specific specialized bodies, such as the GSM Association, for example, and then the Internet Society and affiliated organizations, including the Internet Engineering Task Force that provides the basic request for comments, RFCs. And they all work together in order to get all matters of the internet to work. So for example, the Wi-Fi, which is a spectrum side of things, the Wi-Fi is not developed by the IETF. The specifications for Wi-Fi are different types of specifications that are completely unrelated to the internet itself, but deal with the more like the network layer and the was it transport layer or something like that. It's all at different levels, and it all works together. On the top here, you've got mostly ICANN-related organizations and ISTAR organizations, so regional internet registries and ICANN.
But what we will do is we will go into some detail in some of them, not all, because there are too much. And but we will go. For example, the next slide, it's about Internet Society or ISOC. Up to what you want to say. Then you know already about ISOC, and I will not say too much, except that.
Just one before, actually, I think there's one thing that's really important, is the legal home for the IETF. So the Internet Society was created in 1992. The Internet Engineering Task Force was in 93. No, but before that, it says what the Internet Society is.
Yeah. But we will go there.
Yeah, it doesn't say that it's a legal thing. Anyway, go for it.
It's a legal home for IETF.
Voila! This is important. When you have a body, it often is the case that at some point, when it becomes a bit more formal and more prevalent, it needs to have a legal home. And it's funny because in the real world in general, when you want to start something, you say, okay, let's first define a company, let's register it, let's do this, and then we'll start work. But on the internet, things happen so fast that often a group of people work together, and at some point it's like, okay, we have to start formalizing this. And I think one of the big discussions they had when they created the IETF was, if we're going to formalize this standards development that we've been doing for quite a while, remember, IETF was created in '93, the first RFC was written in the early '70s, so they had tons of RFCs that were not under the IETF. And the question was, what do we do? Do we create a company? Do we create a not-for-profit organization? What do we do to do this? And of course, the moment you create a not-for-profit or a company, you need to pay an accountant for annual accounts, etc., etc. So they had to really put their minds together to find something that would both be able to act as a legal home for the RFCs, so that there could be a copyright on the RFCs and copyright the Internet Society, and the Internet Society would effectively be a legal person, but at the same time not be a commercial endeavor or not have any specific costs that would be related to this, or have these costs taken care of in other ways. And that's how the Internet Society became the home of the IETF. Just a little story on this, so go for it.
And as you know, Internet is for everyone is a vision from Internet Society. I really think that now we need also to say that Internet must be done by everyone, but maybe it will be the next phase for all the organization to take care of the participation of everybody and end user in particular. We have in Internet Society a lot of chapters, and there are in many places in the world, and there are more and more. I guess I have updated.
We're missing the Delhi chapter there, so that was before.
I have updated this slide. It's now 129 chapters around the world, 157 organization members, and 3,580 members and supporters. Members, I can say. Then it's a growing organization also all around the world. And we talked to you about IETF as now within ISOC, and the Internet Architecture Board is, I would say, a board who oversight IETF for the content, not for running the organization or the money of the organization. Now it's some slide in French, and sorry for that, I didn't change them. But ITU, UIT, it's engaged to connect the world, and you know that it was created in 1865, and it was at that time in charge of the telegraph, and now it's charged of the telecommunication, and I guess they were very interesting to become in charge of the internet, but it was not done like that, and I guess it was a good thing that intergovernmental organization didn't take the lead on internet.
And you notice one thing, billing was particularly important, but one of the challenges they had two problems. The first problem was that the telephone was actually invented in more than one location with slightly different systems. So you had Alexander Graham Bell on one side and Giuseppe Marconi on the other side, and they were slightly different systems. So you needed to find some kind of a standard to be able to connect the United States to a country in Europe. That was the first problem. The second thing is, when more countries started getting connected, how do you do the charging? Because the person at the originating end was paying their telecommunication company, but who was paying the communication company at the other end? So they needed to have bilateral agreements between countries. So country A would have a bilateral agreement with country B, with countries A, B, and not with country C, and one of the other countries would have a bilateral agreement with country B, a bit like the peering that we had before. That wasn't working then, because they didn't have the internet to make it work automatically. So they decided, okay, we really have to have a one location to be able to discuss all of these tariffs and coordinate all of our things. So we don't need to do an agreement with every single country that we want to reach. We can just do one agreement with the ITU, at the ITU, and then we're able to reach everyone. And billing is all taken care of within the ITU framework.
I will skip this one. And ITU, it's interesting to see that they are organized in three big areas. One, it's about radio frequencies. The second, it's about standardization, and the third one about development. And as they have this possibility, when you are a government of a developing country, I guess we may be very happy to have support for our development, and therefore we participate to the two others. And it's one way to support ITU, it's a one way for ITU to be supported. But I really think that what is more important is to have an open organization to all stakeholders. It's also organized at the level of different regions, and what is important is to see that they are not follow exactly the same regions and other or internet organization, but there are some link with them.
Again, that's all historical, of course.
Yeah, I will skip that. World Wide Web, we were talking about that this morning. It's also a standardization organization, but a little bit different from IETF, because it's a member organization, and you need to become member, and it's full-time staff. As you know, in IETF, there is no staff except one in ISOC to take care of the money and to organize part of the meeting, but the rest it's done by participants, and there are no membership, there are participation to meetings, participation to working groups. Here you need to be member and you have full-time staff. And they are organized in different regions. One, it's I guess three, maybe now 4 pillars. One is in one university in US, one in Europe, France, one in Japan, and now I guess they are in China too. And as you know, Tim Berners-Lee was the inventor, and now the CEO is Jeffrey J.
The thing about web standards is it involves web browsers, obviously, and content providers. But there's been a lot of discussion recently in the World Wide Web Consortium with regards to the next level of HTML. Because of course, remember the first pages I showed you earlier, that was HTML 1.0, and then it went on to 2, 3. They've reached HTML5, and there are extensions to HTML which can be used. So that all the different browsers, once you've got the standard in the World Wide Web Consortium, all the different browsers can follow these standards. And there's been some controversy recently with regards to the incorporation of, not privacy extensions, of copyright extensions. And the marking of copyright content, and whether the browser, it's at the browser level that any copyrighted material that has been pirated, etc., could be blocked, etc. It's a very big discussion, it's a long discussion. There's been a decision that was made that wasn't bringing full consensus from everyone. It's a bit controversial. We'll probably have to take another 3 hours to go into this one. But.
And now I will try to give you a little test of organization you may never have heard about. This one is organization who develop or try to develop new standards at the level of the applications, and at the same level the email, FTP, or World Wide Web. It's named Froggens, and why it could be interesting is that they try to use one extension, .Froggens, to be the technical layer of what they are doing, and what they try to do is to develop a way to publish on internet where it will be easier than on the web, and with less trouble with bandwidth, and it must be used first in country where you have trouble with bandwidth. and they have organized a full naming system. And here it's a reverse that with a dot, it's a star, but the network name it's prior to the star, and then you have the site name. I don't know what will be the future, but it's interesting to know that they are based in France, and they try to develop that for worldwide use.
It's interesting to note that this is technology that is actually running on top of the DNS. And there have been some discussions, or well, debates always going on and saying, well, you know, ICANN effectively has a monopoly over internet addressing. But that's, of course, a monopoly over the domain name system. Strictly speaking, addressing, there are tons of different types of addressing that are used these days on the internet. They might have one layer that is based on the DNS. But the next layer, look at Facebook, for example, look at the different social networking sites, look at some of the apps. They use different addressing schemes, and Frogans is one of these addressing schemes, and there can be tons of other types. So, yeah.
Thank you, Olivier. Internet jurisdiction. We have saw in the picture of the internet governance that ICANN is not taking care of everything, and ITU is not taking care of everything, and so on and so forth. inSIG, WCC. But if we look at the question we have with cybersecurity, with some of the usage, with how to deal with jurisdiction, and so on and so forth, there is nobody who are taking care of that. And one of the questions after Net Mundial was how we can organize that. And there are different ways of thinking about that. I know that WEF, World Economic Forum, is trying to develop some way to take care of some of the topics. ISOC is trying to take care of some other topics, and so on. But here you have one organization who has developed just to take care of internet and jurisdiction, the question of transborder jurisdiction, how we can deal with something to happen in one country for a user in another country, and with a provider in the third country. And they are really a small but interesting organization. They take care of, they try to be as much as possible multi-stakeholder, and they address the question of this topic.
It's interesting to note, just piggybacking on this, that this of course came up after the Net Mundial meeting that took place in Brazil, and as a follow-up to the Net Mundial initiative, which was supposed to be coming up with a number of fora that would be able to treat those what they call orphan topics, but which often were not orphan, they were just discussed in a smaller group, but not openly. But it's interesting to note that, of course, India had also suggested another process as well for discussing these topics, as Dr. Bavin told us earlier this morning.
Yeah. And now I will try to go quickly through the different United Nations processes. We talk about IGF already. There is a Commission of Science and Technology for Development. Of course, UNESCO taking care of the part of cultural and culture diversity. I will not go because if not, we will be too late for the end of this session. But there are different meetings going on during the year organized by ITU about different topics linked with internet. And of course, you have each 4 years the Plenipotentiary Conference, who is the place where the government deal together about what next about ITU specifically. As you know, IGF, Internet Governance Forum, was born after the World Summit on Information Society, and in parallel to IGF, there is still a WSIS process who is following the question also of internet governance, but it's done by a smaller group, and they are doing some review. And last year or 2 years ago, it was the 10th anniversary, and they were reviewing that. Sorry. With this review?
We're just skipping through some of the slides on some
Yeah.
more details on each one of the conferences. They are relevant and work is going on. The CSTD has had a significant amount of work this year, and they are meant, I think they just a few months from now, in advance of the IGF, they're meant to actually have some more outputs. No one really knows the outputs yet because there's not that much transparency on what the discussions or what direction the discussions are going towards, but we'll find out soon enough.
We already talked about Internet Governance Forum, and I just want to show this slide to tell you again that the next Internet Governance Forum will be in December from the 18th to the 22nd in Geneva, Switzerland. It's a way to come back to the roots because, as you know, in 2003, the first World Summit on Information Society was organized in Geneva.
This section here regarding a negotiated outcome is something that's been discussed again and again at every IGF. Because there are criticisms from some saying, well, you know what, the IGF is a waste of time. It's just a talk shop. People go, they talk, they go home, and nothing happens. And that actually is something which the IGF, people taking part in the IGF are very aware of. There have been improvements every year. The first improvement is, of course, to have messages, have actual session messages so that you reach a decision, and or not decision, but you kind of reach a consensus or reach some kind of output that can then be recorded. And so the IGF outputs for every year have become better and better. There are some that say the IGF should be a decision-making body, should be able to therefore have some committees that would then take a decision based on the discussions made there. The concern that has been expressed to that is if you start having decisions being made at the IGF, it becomes very political, and it also becomes more difficult to take part into this because of the very fact that the politics will come into the discussions taking place. So people are less likely to be open and to express their real points of view and because of the politics that are involved. So that's one of the reasons the IGF has continued to be as it is, and it is improving itself so as to have outputs, but still being a very open place for people to exchange discussions. And often the seed of the discussion is planted at the IGF, and then whatever is being discussed is picked up by specialized bodies. So for example, in cybersecurity, by specialized bodies that deal with cybersecurity and take this as a reference starting point to be able to build on.
Thank you. Now let's go to one country code top-level domain. I have taken the one of AFNIC as I am board member of AFNIC, but I guess you can do the same in different countries where there are CCTLDs, or territory where there are CCTLD. Of course, it's not organized the same. There's big differences because it's, in fact, in each territory or country that the decision is taken to organize. But what I wanted to comment to you is here, .fr is the CCTLD taken care by AFNIC, Association Française pour le Nommage Internet en Coopération. It's one of the ISO 3166 code that it's used for the CCTLD, and it was created in '98. It's a non-for-profit organization, and you have a kind of multi-stakeholder organization with a research center, with a government representative, and with some elected people, both from the registrar side, what we call an international college, that's gather people from CCTLD, from Francophonie, and users, and I am one of them. It's really to take care of internet in France at the level of the CCTLD, but also to try to gather the people to be a place where we can talk about topics both at the French level or at the more global level. And they take care of, they have a contract with the French government to run .fr and other TLD like the .re for Réunion, one of the islands, but there are also backend registry for some new GTLD. We talk about, and we will talk a little bit later about the organization, about IP addresses, but at the level of the CCTLD, you have also organization at the regional level. And at the European level, it's the Center, Council of European National Top-Level Domain Registry. You have the same at Latin America and Caribbean, one in Africa, and APTLD, it's also one of them. I will not spend too much time, as we have already talked about regional internet registry, but I will just show you the next slide.
There's one thing to mention actually. The first two internet registries were ARIN to start with and RIPE. And it's with time, because originally, of course, there was just one regional internet registry, and that was John Pastel, so a single person. So when he couldn't cope with it, they started putting together regional internet registries, and it all was just happening as per the needs, and effectively needing to have someone in the right region to be able to serve a market, and that's how each one of them were created.
And we also already talked about root servers, and we talk about the 13 root servers. I will show you directly the image. Where are the 13 root servers? Of course, as it was explained to you, and it's an important point, that there is already a lot of image of those 13 root servers all around the world in different countries. And that's a very important improvement, because the discussion about do we need to move one root server to somewhere else will be a nightmare, because everybody will want, or any country will want one. Now every country can have a copy of this server, and I don't think it makes so much difference. I would say the only one very important is the A server, who is run by VeriSign, because it's the one when IANA make a change in the file of the root, it's go to this one before going to the other, and it's this one who is even more important than the 12 others. But except that, what I think it's Anycast technology is really very important, because it's allow the distribution of server all around the world for the roots. Okay, let's go to ICANN, but we already talked a lot about Internet Corporation for assigned name and numbers. Then I will try to go quite quickly, and if you have questions, I will be able to come back, because I have a lot of slides, and it could take us 1 or 2 hours to go through in detail. It was created in 1998, and what it's important to note is that we will see that in the next slides, but the relationship with the US government I changed in the last 2 years.
It's worth mentioning that it's private sector led, which I think was one of the big points that Arrogant Magaziner and the people that created it were trying to push forward.
Yeah, but also that was part of the discussion about the transition. Is it private sector led, or it is a multi-stakeholder organization? And what is a private led? Is it the private company? Is it only the provider of internet? Is it where is the space for end user? Where is the space for civil society? And so on and so forth. And yes, it was written private-led, but I am not sure that it still lacks that in the new bylaws. But I can't say with sure how it is. But what is important is that it's a multi-stakeholder, and everybody can have its voice within ICANN. You already know what ICANN is doing. It's taking care of the numbers here. It's taking care of the GTLD, generic top-level domain, and they're taking care indirectly of the CCTLD, indirectly because they are not running that or distributed it, but it's in the root servers and they have to take care of that. It's not the same with ID and CCTLD as it's created by ICANN. But for the ASCII TLD, CCTLD, it was before ICANN inactions, and it's not taking care. And as you can see, we talk about names and numbers, but there are also protocol and parameters. But as the previous speaker already talked about that.
It's interesting to note that one always accuses ICANN of doing all sorts of things, and ICANN is not just one organization. It's it's different layers to the organization. So the protocols and parameters is actually nothing really that ICANN actually does. It's more like it acts as a repository for protocols and parameters that are being discussed elsewhere. The lookups is an operational function. So it's ICANN staff, namely in this case, because it's just the root effectively, the IANA functions, which are now called the post-transition, was a public technical identifiers function. But ICANN policy in the middle is the one thing that is actually being entirely done by volunteers. Sebastien's a volunteer, he's on the At-Large Advisory Committee. I'm a volunteer, the chair of the European At-Large Organization. There are hundreds of other volunteers. It's actually open to everyone. So if you're interested in making the actual policy that directs later on how these lookups are made and all of the other things that ICANN is dealing with, that's the place where you need to go. And it's interesting to note it's really at the center of all of ICANN. ICANN staff is only there, when it regards policy, is there to support the community. There are quite a number of rules that stop ICANN staff from actually dealing with policy. They deal with implementation, but they always have to ask the community for their directions, in which way they have to go, etc. I think that was an important point to make, because often people think, well, so it's ICANN employees decide policy, but how do they find out? How do they make it? And it's an interesting process by which they do it. That gives you the volunteer side.
That's the volunteer side, yes, and you have a different type of organization, and some of the organizations have a link or send somebody to the board, either a liaison here for these 4 bodies now, and or elect the people, and the nominating committee, it's select 8 people, and it's an open process. And if you are interested in be a leader within ICANN, and the nominating committee, it's a place where you can have a look too. I will try, as it's a multi-stakeholder model, you have the one in charge of the addresses, it's the address supporting organization, the one about the generic supporting organization, about the generic top-level domain name, the country code, and at large with the voice of end user. And it's a supporting organization, it's an advisory committee, not a supporting organization.
Just one thing to add on this with regards to the GNSO. We haven't got a specific slide for GNSO, or?
Yeah, we
have. Okay, all right. Do that. All right, yeah, so that's what the point I was going to make, actually. So the supporting organizations make the policy. The advisory committees comment on the policy. The CCNSO doesn't make very much policy because most policy for country code are done at a local level. So any policy for .in would be done in India, and it's quite normal that ICANN wouldn't have anything to say about this, or couldn't say anything about it, because India is a sovereign country after all. But for the generic names, which span the globe, the policy is made in the generic name supporting organization, in various working groups. And if we actually go back to the other slide and see who are the members of the GNSO, you find out that you have contracted parties, so the generic top-level domain registries and registrars, the registries being the people that actually, you have, here we go, excellent. The registries are actually the people that hold the register of all of the domain names under that extension, and the registrars are the people that sell you the domain names. You as end users, you go and you buy your domain name from a registrar or from an agent that acts for the registrar. That's the contracted parties. Then there's the non-contracted parties on the other side, and those include the commercial constituencies of business, intellectual property, and internet service providers, and the non-commercial constituencies like the not-for-profit organizational concerns, NPOC, and the non-commercial users constituency, NCUC. You'll probably, some of you might actually already be members of the NCUC or NPOC. So that was the way that the policy gets built over at the GNSO level. It gets done in working groups, and in those working groups, the working groups are open with everyone, for everyone. They're called policy development process, PDP processes, and if you are an individual, you can take part into these working groups and contribute to the policy being put together. The way that it gets made will probably take another 3 or 4 hours to explain, but it does work eventually. And on top of that, of course, you've got the GNSO Council with, then there were actually 3 people that were, well, there was a non-commercial,
non-com
appointee, ELAC and CCNSO liaison, and now there's a GATT liaison as well, which was only finalized a few months ago.
And where I was talking about non-com here, you have 3 non-com appointees, 1 at the level of the council and 1 at the level of the houses. And there are 3 seats on the GNSO for non-com appointee. And there is 3 for the CCNSO. I will go...
that's the difficult one.
Yeah.
Policy development process.
I guess we will not go through because it's...
I can do it quickly.
Okay, go.
Quickly. Staff issues an issues report first, based on input from the community. So, someone identifies there's a problem. The community gets asked about the problem. Staff puts together an issues report and says, we've identified the following, the community has identified the following problems. It goes into a working group. There's a first draft of the responses after a few months, sometimes it's months, sometimes it's years, that goes into a public comment system, which is open for everyone. It's on the website. Anybody can comment and come back and say, I agree with this, I don't agree with this. It goes back to the working group, make some changes to the recommendations. Then there's a final report that gets given. The final report gets passed on to the GNSO Council, which we've just spoken about, and they basically vote on it, and if they vote on it positively, recommendations are passed to the ICANN board. The ICANN board then gathers another round of public comments, just in case you've missed the first round. You arrive to it and go, wait, I still need to say something about that. So the board asks for another round, and then the board decides to vote. There are some cases when, if there is a significant opposition in the comments that are received, the board might actually say, look, this might not pass, and goes back to the GNSO and say, please restart the whole process again. So you go from the end back to the start. But that's the way that it actually works. Some cases, some topics, like who is, for example, have been going on for, I don't know how many years, 10 years, 12 years, more than that. And because they're very, very controversial topics, and of course the legal framework in which we're working on has also changed. So sometimes by the time you reach the end, the beginning has changed and you have to start again at the beginning. However, some policy development processes have taken less than 6 months. They've been very fast, and in some cases, maybe even 3 months. It's gone from the start all the way up to the end, and they've been very successful. And that's how all policy gets built at ICANN.
And the board 2 years ago wanted to go outside of this discussion about who is, and the board asked the GNSO to start thinking about registration data services. And it ended up to be the same mess in the discussion. Even if the board decided to have an expert group to start the reflection before going to the GNSO, at the end of the day today we have a discussion in both arenas, and if we add to that today European develop a new regulation, GDPR that will deal with the data privacy, not just in Europe, but for all European citizens all around the world. It's something that ICANN has to take into account, but also all the registry and registrar who have European citizens who buy or deal with them. And it's a complex issue, and it adds to the difficulty both to the WIS and the registry data services.
The GDPR, General Data Protection Regulation, affects any company that holds information about a European citizen, wherever they are located in the world. So I think it would affect some Indian companies as well that might have information if they're providing back office work, etc., databases. And the regulation has gotten companies to open their eyes for two reasons. Well, actually, no, really, one reason. If you don't comply with it and they do a spot check, you will have, I think it's a very short amount of time that you'll have to fix it. If you don't fix it in time, then you can be afflicted with a fine which is equal to or up to 3% of your annual turnover. Yes, 3% slashed out. So you're talking about potentially millions and millions of dollars of fines. So yeah, companies are listening.
And the new recommendation will start in May next week, next year, and we have not so much time to deal with that all around the world. You already talked about what is consensus policies, and we'll go. How you can participate to the GNSO. I already talked in general, but here you can, of course, participate and make public comments. And you go to the ICANN website and you have the list of the currently open comments about policy development. You can participate to any mailing list about any topics, join a group, whatever working group you want, or you can be joining a stakeholder group or a constituency, and you can listen to any of the meetings organized by GNSO, but I guess it's the same with at large and for other parts of the organization. So country code, it's contrary to what it's written here, it's by and only for the CCTLD manager, but some other, like me, participate to the creation of the CCNSO. And what was the deal at the end was only CCTLD manager plus 3 from the NOMCOM. That was a way for people like me to push the CCTLD to be open to outsiders in the discussion at the level of their council. The CCTLD are not mandatory member of the CCNSO, and they are part member and part who are not member. But the CCNSO have to take care of the one also outside of the organization.
ICANN has absolutely no jurisdiction over any of the CCTLDs. There are some CCTLDs that are so vehemently against ICANN that they've decided never to go to any ICANN meeting or not operate under ICANN in any way. But ICANN still carries them in the route.
Okay, then address subordinate organization. I guess that the previous speaker, Sania, already goes through all that, and I will not add because he's much more.
Sebastien, I didn't explain about NRO. I saw NRO in your slide there.
Can you do it, please?
Go for it, Sonny.
I can. So the NRO is part of ASO, Address Supporting Organization under ICANN. NRO is representing all the 5 RIRs. It's Number Resource Organization. And the NRO, in each individual RIRs, they elect 3 members of the community to represent on the Address Council. 2 members are elected by the community in each RIR, and 1 is selected by the respective RIR board or the executive board. And these members represent on the Address Council, and some of them will be on the get nominated through NOMCOM to ICANN board as well later in their lifetime. That's about it. Actually, one more thing, the NRO is actually a global policy coordinating body. That's the most important function of the NRO. I shouldn't miss that. So the policy development happens in two forms in each RIR. One is a policy proposal discussion that happens within the RIR region, and the other one is a global policy coordination that happens if a policy has to go through each and every region and each and every RIR, then that happens on the NRO ASO level. That's about it. Thanks.
Thank you very much. As there is just 10 minutes left for the presentation, I will go quickly through the slide and just take one or two in the next. Then we talk about the advisory committee. You have at-large advisory committee, you have governmental advisory committee, security and stability advisory committee, and root server system advisory committee. I must point out that there is a big difference between ALAC and the other. The other are all the participants in this arena, the government. The GAC, it's all the government. ALAC is just 15 people who is the committee. And therefore, if we compare, we must talk about at-large. And at-large is all the regional at-large organization, and within them the at-large supporting organization and some of the individual members. Then it's a little misleading to call them the same, but it's a situation today as I can. What was a big change in 2010 that the selection of a board member here, we are now going through the third one. We're starting at the end of the Abu Dhabi meeting. The bottom above ALAC, but I will go through quickly. You will get this slide, and if you have questions.
Mind the GAC.
Yeah, mind the GAC and the GAC, but mind the GAC, and there are more and more members, and the participation is very well organized, and the GAC meeting are very well attended.
So that was information as of 2011. There are a lot more GAC members that have since then joined. But back in 2012, it had 120 government representatives. It's still growing. So yeah, 150 plus in 2016. And it provides ICANN with advice on policy issues, basically. It has a special relationship with the ICANN board, is that if the ICANN board doesn't agree with the point of view of the GAC, then they have to go into a negotiation of some sort, which is usually quite open, and there are quite a few going on at the moment.
Yeah, and some of them are dealing with GTLDs. SAC is really dealing with the security and stability, and they give advice to the board, but also advice to the other SO and ACs. And they are very focused and specialized people, and it's a very important group within ICANN. You have the one taking care of the root servers. They are reorganized since 2 years, and they are doing a very good job too. If you want to know more, you can subscribe to the policy update. It's a monthly newsletter. I guess I will not go through the next part with GTLD, because if not, I will have 2 hours more. But what's interesting is that one of the reasons for ICANN to develop new GTLD, new generic top-level domain, was to help innovation. Of course, some, and I am part of them, say you also develop the difficulty for end user to understand where they are, what to use, and how to work with that. But the goal was to open the choice, the possibility for a user to make a choice, and for innovation to come. When we talk about CCTLD and GTLDs, you know that better than me, then let's go. IDNs
were important, I think.
Just to show you this one, it was before 2012, the situation of the GTLD, of the TLD well. And now we have 1,000 or even more new top-level domains. And I can't do the same design that this one I have done in 2004.
IDNs are interesting in that they were introduced so as to provide local scripts for languages that didn't use the Latin script. So until a few years ago, you could only type things in Latin, and when you had a lot, not in Latin, sorry, using the Latin script or the Roman characters. And there is a trouble when, I mean, I'm not a user of non-Latin script characters, but apparently you have to each time switch your keyboard from the Latin script to your local script back and forth, and it's become a bit difficult. So it was pretty much meant to be able to provide local users with the use of local characters for their domain names. These are among the first ones that were created. There's a whole system where you've got the actual labels in the actual script itself, and next to it, this translates to a code in the Latin script, or in Roman characters, so that afterwards, when you do not have this, if you want to email over to that domain name, there's still a way to email to it. And the whole domain name system is actually based still on the Latin character set. There's a huge world with regards to these scripts due to the fact that in many scripts you can type a word, or you can write something in more than one way. So you've got equivalencies between two different words. It's required the use of linguists and the use of experts for each one to develop a set of label generation rules, what they call label generation rules, for each one of those scripts. And there are a lot more than that now. So we're talking about an extremely great amount of work by a lot of people, and many of whom were volunteers or are volunteers in those things. So and I think that you recognize, maybe here there's Haiti, but I know there's, well, Tamil as well, and there are others now for the Indian subcontinent. So that initially was something that was developed by the Internet Engineering Task Force along with the Unicode Consortium. And so they developed the technical side of it, and then ICANN took this on and then brought linguists into it due to the problems with that. So, yeah.
It's maybe the way why it's so complicated. Sometimes when some technical people just didn't answer to a request but decided to develop themselves something, it's ended up to be very, very complex. But the reverse could be true too. And, I don't want to blame them, but I think that they were developing something for technical reasons and not really for how we wanted to use it, and that was part of the problem. Okay, I think we have 5 minutes more. There is two solutions. Either I skip a lot and I go to, yeah, it's 5 minutes left, I agree with you. Then I want to open the floor, and then I will see with the organizer if, because I think it's important to go through the IANA transition and ICANN transition. But as I have another slot tomorrow, maybe I can use this, but I will see with Satish and the other. Then I will stop here, go to something more relevant. But I would like to open the floor, and if you have any question of what we already talked to you about, or comments or point of view, you are more than welcome.
Okay, I have a question.
Yeah, cool.
So it's about this organization W3C. So in the news recently I have read that the Electronic Frontier Foundation, they have resigned from W3C regarding the HTML5 DRM standard. So I wanted to know like how that decision making process in W3C works. Is it multi-stakeholder? And why EFF is supposed to be a huge organization which supports the digital rights, right? So what forced them to resign from that organization?
So, so I've followed this just as a reader of the news. I'm not involved in the discussions themselves. What it appears to be is that they have a bottom-up process for discussing issues. And these famous extensions that I was talking about with regards to tracking who is reading what, and finding out and blocking of content that would be copyrighted in one way, opens the door to the selective blocking of any type of content. And I think that the Electronic Frontier Foundation, that is an organization that really looks out for human rights and for these issues, to keep the content open and usable and so on, found that, well, it appears that the communities that worked on this decided against the W3C proceeding forward with implementing this. But then the decision was made by the W3C to follow those extensions and to actually implement this. I don't know why or how. I haven't gone deeply enough in there. I don't know if a process wasn't pursued or something. I don't know either if there is an appeals mechanism or something. I know that in ICANN, certainly, if the ICANN board goes against a decision made by the community, there are appeals processes that are possible. There's an independent review process that is possible. And there's also a final case where if the community really is annoyed with its board of directors, they can press a button and kick the, well, maybe not press a button, but yeah, it might want to press a button and kick the whole board of directors out. So that's, sort of last case scenario, nuclear option is what we call it. I don't know if that's the case, if there's something like that in W3C, but it appears that this has effectively prompted the EFF, Electronic Frontier Foundation, to say, I'm sorry, we're out of here, and they basically left as a measure of protest. And it might be that other organizations follow suit as well, I don't know. But that's what I've read so far. It's an ongoing story.
I have a request actually, this is Satish here. I'd like some update, maybe tomorrow in the other sessions, on the geoname issue. There are some questions on it. It seems to be very hot.
You're really going to all the controversial stuff, aren't you?
So maybe tomorrow it'll be useful if you can share, either of you can share some information
Yeah, sure.
on that.
Any other question, comments? We need to wake you up because you will have some work to do now. It will not be any more on me, but go.
Can you elaborate more on the role of IAB, architecture board, as to what it does and what role does it play?
Yeah, I'll try to find it. I'll find it and give it to you.
Yeah, the IAB is actually not a very vibrant organization. It's actually, it works hand in hand with the Internet Engineering Task Force. And it looks at the wider issues of the Internet's future, if any major changes need to happen. Things like, for example, deciding to move from IPv4 to IPv6. That's something which the IAB would be looking at and would be thinking, okay, strategically, we do need to implement something like this. It's mostly composed of people who have been around for, ever since the very early days. Well, they call them the white beards. But I think that some of them are even losing, they've lost their hair already and they're losing their beard too, so I don't know what they're going to call them. But, and you will have noticed they're not very gender balanced if they're white beards. But these are people who've been around for a very long time. They're sort of the people that have been through other times of changes. For example, the big change into the DNS, other big changes that have happened with the introduction of the internationalized domain names, the IDNs, and other changes that have taken place when they've had to take some top-level domains out of the root. There used to be a top-level domain called .nato. That was taken out. It's some historical stuff that was taken out over time. CS was taken out because it was Czechoslovakia, and then Czechoslovakia got taken into Czech Republic and Slovakia on the other side. Most of this was done just in very early days of ICANN, or before actually ICANN, so they had to be involved. But they deal mostly with protocols as well. So all the more strategic issues are dealt with by the Internet Architecture Board.
Right, so thanks very much, Sebastien and Olivier. Any other mics on? So yeah, so you will be coming back tomorrow, so we'll be able to ask you more questions tomorrow.
And perhaps we can go through the INA stewardship and ICANN accountability at the same time as we go into these questions about ICANN, the big hot topics of the day. I think we touched enough on the GDPR today, but certainly the one on geographic names is another real headache.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.